Imagine standing on the battlefield where the air is thick with the stench of blood, and every step you take is weighed down by the cruelty of ancient warfare. This is a world where violence goes beyond the battlefield, where brutal acts committed under the guise of warfare would be classified as war crimes today. The ancient world, governed by the ruthless will of empires, was marked by brutality so severe that it left deep scars on both the victims and the societies that carried them out. These acts weren't just about victory. They were about sending a message, a legacy of fear and control that shaped the course of history. One of the most chilling examples is the devastation wrought by Alexander the Great during the siege of Tyre in 332 BCE. Tyre, once a prosperous city, stood firm against Alexander's forces, but when its leaders refused to surrender, they sealed their fate. Alexander, in a display of unimaginable cruelty, slaughtered over 6,000 people and crucified 2,000 more as a warning to others. The terror didn't stop there. The remaining 30,000 inhabitants, including women and children, were sold into slavery. In his eyes, the city was a symbol of defiance that had to be crushed to maintain control. This same pattern of devastation can be seen in the brutal sack of Carthage. Rome, with Cato the Elder leading the charge, decided that Carthage must be erased not just as a rival but as a symbol of defiance. Over a period of 3 years, the Romans besieged the city, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of civilians and then systematically razing every part of it, leaving behind nothing but ashes. The women, children, and elderly, none were spared. The destruction wasn't just a military action, it was a deliberate attempt to erase an entire civilization. The Assyrian Empire, known for its reign of terror, took this cruelty even further. The Assyrians didn't just conquer, they used violence as a tool of psychological warfare. Flaying their captives, impaling them on spikes, and cutting off limbs were regular tactics to spread fear. It wasn't enough to defeat their enemies, they had to make sure that the memory of their suffering haunted anyone who dared to resist. These horrifying events serve as a reminder of the unchecked power that ancient rulers wielded over the lives of their people. The brutality was not only a means to an end, but a reflection of the society's desire to control through fear. It's in these dark chapters of history that we are reminded of the fragile nature of peace and the haunting consequences of violence that shapes our world. The ancient world was a stage for unimaginable brutality, where war and conquest often came at a staggering human cost. Empires wielded power not only through military might, but also through the use of terror, creating a lasting legacy of suffering for those who dared to oppose them. One of the darkest examples of this was the destruction of Carthage in 146 BCE, a city that had once been a thriving hub of culture and trade. The Roman Empire, driven by an insatiable desire for dominance, decided to obliterate Carthage once and for all. After 3 years of relentless siege, the Romans finally breached the city walls. What followed was a horrifying spectacle of violence that would forever be etched into the annals of history. Hundreds of thousands of Carthaginian civilians were slaughtered, their lives extinguished in a manner so brutal that it would make even the most hardened warriors recoil in shock. The city was reduced to rubble, its streets filled with the bodies of the dead. For the survivors, mostly women, children, and the elderly, life became a grim existence as they were enslaved and scattered across the vast Roman Empire. The sheer scale of the destruction was so immense that even the historian Polybius, who documented the event, described it as one of the most harrowing sights he had ever witnessed. The Roman forces, driven by a singular goal, to erase their rival from history, spared no one, not even the most defenseless. The brutal massacre was not just an act of war, it was an attempt to eradicate an entire civilization. The message was clear: defy Rome and your entire existence would be erased not only from the physical world but from history itself. In the end, the utter annihilation of Carthage serves as a powerful reminder of the dark side of power, how it can be used to crush entire societies, leaving nothing but a desolate wasteland in its wake. The victims of such atrocities, like the people of Carthage, were not only punished for their defiance, but also forgotten, their voices drowned out by the relentless force of imperial control. Their story is a haunting reminder of the price paid by those who dared to challenge the forces of oppression. In the ancient world, power was often wielded through terror, and no empire exemplified this more than the Assyrian Empire. Renowned for their military dominance, the Assyrians left behind a chilling legacy of cruelty that instilled fear throughout the ancient Near East. Their reign, which lasted from the 10th to the 7th centuries BCE, was defined not only by military conquest, but by their grotesque methods of punishing those who resisted them. One of the most terrifying forms of punishment employed by the Assyrians was flaying, skinning their captives alive. This brutal practice was not just a means of killing, it was an act of psychological warfare designed to break the spirit of their enemies and serve as a public warning. The Assyrians would display the skin of their victims on the walls of the cities they conquered, a grotesque reminder of the fate that awaited anyone who dared oppose them. For the Assyrians, this wasn't just about conquest. It was about instilling absolute terror. They sought to make an example of those who defied them, ensuring that their enemies would know the gruesome fate that awaited them. But the terror didn't end there. The Assyrians were infamous for their use of mass executions. Entire populations of cities that resisted their rule were put to death, beheaded, burned alive, or impaled on spikes. These public spectacles were designed to instill fear not only in the immediate victims, but in everyone who witnessed or heard of the atrocities. In the eyes of the Assyrian rulers, there was no place for mercy. Rebellion was met with extreme violence, and resistance was crushed with unrelenting force. The Assyrian Empire's reign of terror lasted centuries, but it was also the very cruelty that defined their rule that ultimately led to their downfall. The empire made so many enemies with its brutality that by the 7th century BCE, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians rose against them, sacking the Assyrian capital of Nineveh and bringing an end to their reign. The empire fell, but the legacy of their horrific cruelty remained a stark reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink when power is abused. The Assyrians' brutal tactics show just how destructive unchecked power can be. The suffering they inflicted on their enemies was unimaginable, and the terror they instilled lasted long after their empire crumbled. The haunting reminder of their cruelty remains in history, a testament to the terrifying consequences of oppression and the relentless thirst for control. Genghis Khan's Mongol Empire was built upon a foundation of blood and terror, leaving a mark of destruction that would echo throughout history. His campaigns across Asia and parts of Europe were not only about conquering lands, but about creating an empire through unrelenting violence, mass executions, and psychological warfare. The Mongols' terrifying legacy isn't simply the sheer scale of their military prowess, but the chilling methods they used to instill fear and crush any resistance. One of the most notorious examples of Mongol brutality was the siege of Kaffa in 1346 CE. The city held by the Genoese had resisted Mongol attacks for years, but the Mongols, led by a descendant of Genghis Khan, had a horrifying new weapon in their arsenal: biological warfare. The Mongols catapulted diseased corpses into the city, unleashing a plague that would kill millions across Europe and Asia. This gruesome tactic is believed to have played a significant role in the spread of the Black Death, one of the most devastating pandemics in history. The use of disease as a weapon exemplifies the Mongols' willingness to sacrifice human lives in order to achieve their goals, further emphasizing their relentless cruelty. But it wasn't just disease that made the Mongols feared. During their conquests, cities that resisted Mongol rule faced brutal annihilation. In 1221 CE, the Mongols captured Nishapur, a city in modern-day Iran. After the rebellion killed one of Genghis Khan's sons-in-law, the Mongols responded with brutal retribution. It's estimated that as many as 1.7 million people were slaughtered, with the city reduced to nothing but a pile of corpses. Men, women, and children were all murdered in cold blood, a stark reminder of the Mongols' complete disregard for human life. These mass executions were not random. They were calculated, designed to break the spirit of any city that dared to resist Mongol rule. The Mongols were also infamous for their exploitation of women during their conquests. Survivors of these massacres, especially women, were often taken as war prizes. Genghis Khan himself fathered hundreds, if not thousands, of children during his campaigns, using women as tools to expand his bloodline and his empire. The widespread sexual exploitation by the Mongols highlights the brutal and dehumanizing tactics they employed to assert their dominance. The Mongol Empire's story is one of unyielding terror, a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink when power is wielded without restraint. The brutality of their conquests reshaped entire regions, leaving a legacy of destruction and fear that lasted for centuries. Genghis Khan's empire may have fallen, but the echoes of their cruelty remain a chilling testament to the price of unchecked ambition and tyranny. The Vikings, often remembered for their seafaring prowess and exploration, carried with them a darker legacy, one of violence, terror, and ruthless raids. Beneath the surface of their reputation as brave explorers and traders lies a history marked by brutality, particularly when they attacked monasteries and settlements along the coasts of England, Ireland, and France. These raids were not just about acquiring wealth, they were a message, a deliberate act of dominance and fear. Their attacks left entire villages destroyed, with survivors either captured as slaves or left to face the chaos of ruined lives. One of the most shocking and horrifying Viking raids took place in 793 CE, when Norse warriors sacked the monastery of Lindisfarne in Northumbria, England. This attack was brutal beyond measure. Monks were killed, treasures looted, and sacred sites set on fire. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which documented the event, described it as a great slaughter, noting the invaders' mercilessness. The violence wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The Vikings were not merely after treasure, they sought to instill terror to show that no place, not even holy sites, was sacred from their wrath. This raid marked the beginning of a series of Viking attacks that would terrorize Europe for centuries, where fear was as much a weapon as their swords. What made these raids particularly terrifying was their speed and surprise. Viking warriors, often with little warning, descended upon unsuspecting coastal towns and villages, overwhelming them with sheer force. The ferocity of these attacks was designed not only to plunder, but to humiliate. The Vikings left a trail of devastation, with entire villages wiped off the map. For those who survived, the aftermath was nothing short of catastrophic. Many were taken as slaves, their homes destroyed, their families scattered. The Vikings' raids weren't about mere conquest. They were a brutal assertion of dominance, a message that those who resisted would face utter destruction. Yet beyond the brutality of their raids, the Vikings were also laying the groundwork for a legacy that would shape the future. Their violent conquests were a means of expanding their influence, but the fear they instilled in their enemies is what truly defined them. They were not just warriors, they were terror itself, striking fear into the hearts of those they encountered. Their raids were a chilling reminder of how power, when wielded with cruelty and fear, can leave an indelible mark on history. The Vikings' legacy, though often overshadowed by their achievements in exploration, is a testament to the depths of human cruelty and the lengths to which power can be abused. Their terror didn't just alter the course of history, it reshaped the very fabric of Europe, leaving a legacy of fear that would last for generations. Throughout history, Warfare has not only been about conquering lands or defeating enemies, but often about leaving a terrifying legacy of destruction. In the case of Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire, their conquests were fueled by an unrelenting thirst for dominance, and they used any means necessary to ensure their control over vast territories. The Mongols' brutal tactics were unmatched not only in terms of military prowess, but in the sheer scale of their cruelty, which would shock the world and leave scars on the regions they invaded for centuries. One of the most horrific examples of their brutality occurred during the siege of the Crimean city of Kaffa in 1346. The Mongols, locked in a bitter battle with the Genoese defenders, resorted to a weapon so gruesome it would leave a lasting mark on biological warfare. The Mongols, in a desperate bid to breach the city's defenses, hurled diseased corpses over the city walls, unleashing the plague that would eventually spread throughout Europe. The Black Death, one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, claimed millions of lives. This horrifying tactic, though grotesque, highlighted the Mongols' ruthless ingenuity and their willingness to use any method to crush resistance, no matter how inhumane. But the Mongols' terror did not stop there. Their conquests were marked by widespread massacres where entire populations were slaughtered. In 1221, after the city of Nishapur in Iran rebelled against Mongol forces, Genghis Khan ordered the execution of every man, woman, and child. The carnage was so immense that historians estimate up to 1.7 million people perished. Cities like Nishapur were reduced to nothing but piles of corpses, and the Mongols would leave behind a trail of fear and devastation wherever they went. In some cases, the survivors were taken as slaves, forced into servitude as part of the Mongol war machine. What makes these massacres even more chilling is the way they were used as psychological tools. The Mongols wanted to instill fear, and they did so with a cold and calculated approach. They did not just conquer, they obliterated. They made examples of entire cities, ensuring that any resistance would be met with overwhelming force. The cities that resisted Mongol rule were either wiped off the map or enslaved as the empire expanded and stretched its reach. Genghis Khan and his descendants used terror as a tool of war, and it worked. Their brutal tactics changed the world, leaving a legacy of fear and destruction in their wake. The Mongols did not just conquer, they terrorized, and the scars of their reign would echo throughout history. Their story is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of cruelty used as a means of control. The Assyrian Empire, one of the most fearsome and brutal civilizations in history, left behind a legacy of unimaginable cruelty that shaped the ancient world. From the 10th to the 7th centuries BCE, the Assyrians dominated the Near East, not only through their military might, but also through their terrifying use of violence as a psychological weapon. Their reign of terror was not just about conquering lands, it was about instilling fear and breaking the will of their enemies through gruesome acts of torture and execution. One of the most chilling punishments used by the Assyrians was flaying, the act of skinning captives alive and displaying their mutilated bodies as a warning to others. This barbaric act was not carried out in secret. It was a public spectacle designed to terrorize entire populations. The Assyrians would take the skins of their victims and hang them on the walls of conquered cities, sending a clear message to anyone who dared to defy them. This gruesome practice exemplified the Assyrians' brutal approach to warfare, where cruelty was as much a weapon as their swords and spears. In addition to flaying, the Assyrians employed other forms of torture that would haunt their enemies for generations. Prisoners were often impaled on spikes, left to die in agony, as a stark reminder of what awaited anyone who opposed Assyrian rule. The Assyrians took great pride in their ability to instill terror, and they documented their horrific acts in inscriptions and carvings, that proudly displayed their conquests and the suffering of their enemies. For them, terror was not just a strategy, it was a way of life. But this reign of terror was not without consequences. The Assyrians made too many enemies, and their cruelty ultimately contributed to their downfall. By the 7th century BCE, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians rose up against the Assyrian Empire, eventually sacking its capital, Nineveh, and bringing an end to their brutal reign. The Assyrian Empire's story is a stark reminder of how unchecked power fueled by cruelty and fear can lead to an empire's destruction. The Assyrians may have been feared in their time, but their legacy is one of horror, a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink when power is wielded without mercy. Their brutality serves as a chilling testament to the dangers of cruelty and the eventual downfall that comes from making enemies through terror and violence.